Of course, as soon as I start stream is when my fucking ice machine decides to start making noises. And there we go. Twitch.tv / Hypnotic Aphrodite. You heard the audiobook? Nice. Hello. Hi. Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous. It's like when you get called to fucking read something in school. I'm like, are there gonna be words that I'm gonna pronounce stupidly? Possibly. The picture instantly. Also, we all have a connection with this book, huh? Oh, I just turned the ice machine on. So I don't know why. Oh, my fucking jaw is sore. Oh. How? I can't tell why. That's annoying though. Ba, ba, ba. Oh, the story got absolutely fucking wild. As the books progress, like, this shit goes from 1 to 100 real fast. Am I feeling sick? No, I'm not feeling sick. Like, while I was eating my lunch earlier, I was feeling something, and then I took a cat nap, and it feels like more sore. I don't know why. was gonna go on TikTok is what I was gonna do. No. Hello. Okay. Stick that there. Hello, hello. Put out and start some fires. Oh boy, have fun with that. You were feeling bad yesterday. Turned out you had COVID. No, I've had COVID before. This is more just a physical thing. Oh, thank you. You're causing chaos. I believe it. I believe it. I'm like nervous. I haven't read this book in so long. Are you guys prepared? I don't know if I'm prepared, but we'll find out. All right. Chapter 1. Molly Moon looked down at her pink, blotchy legs. It wasn't the bath water that was making them molted? Like spam. It's already begun. It's a different thing, you know, reading all of this in your head when you're a child, and then having to read it out loud and realizing you actually don't know how to read. Anyway. They were always that color, and so skinny. Maybe one day, like an ugly duckling turning into a swan, her knock-kneed legs might grow into the most beautiful legs in the world. Some hope. Molly leaned back until her curly brown hair and her ears were under the water. She stared at the fly-speckled yellow paint that was peeling off the wall and the damp patch on the ceiling where strange mushrooms grew. Ew. Water filled her ears, and the world sounded foggy and far away. Molly shut her eyes. It was an ordinary November evening, and she was in a shabby bathroom in a crumbling building called the Hardwick Home Orphanage. She imagined flying over it like a bird, looking down at its gray slate roof and its bramble-filled garden. She imagined flying higher until she was looking down on the hillside where Hardwick Village lay. Up and up she went until Hardwick House became tiny. She could see the whole of the town of Briarsville beyond it. As Molly flew higher and higher, she saw the rest of the country, and now the coastline too, with sea on all sides. Her mind rocketed upward until she was flying in space, looking down at the earth, and there she hovered. Molly liked to fly away from the world in her imagination. It was relaxing, and often when she was in this state, she'd feel different. Molly had this special feeling tonight, as if something exciting or strange were about to happen to her. The last time she felt special, she found half-eaten packet of candy on the pavement in the village. The time before, she'd got away with watching 2 hours of evening television instead of 1. Molly wondered what surprise would greet her this time. Then she opened her eyes and was back in the bath. She looked at her distorted reflection in the underside of the chrome tap. Oh dear, surely she wasn't as ugly as that. Was that pink lump of dough her face? Was that potato her nose? Were those small green lights her eyes? Someone was hammering downstairs. That was strange. No one ever mended anything in Hardwick House. Then Molly realized that the hammering was someone banging on the bathroom door. Oh, thank you, Julia. It's because it's a British book. That's fair. Hello. Trouble. Molly shot up and hit her head on the tap. Ouch. The banging outside was very loud now, and with it came a fierce bark. Molly Moon, open this door at once. If you don't, I'll be forced to use a master key. Molly could hear keys rattling on a ring. She looked at the level of her bathwater and gasped. It was much too deep and well over the allowed level. She pulled the plug out and wrapped herself in her towel, just in time. The door swung open. Miss Adderstone was in and darting to the bathtub, her scaly nose wrinkling as she discovered the deep draining water. She rolled up her polyester sleeve and pushed the plug back in. As I suspected, she hissed. Intentional flouting of orphanage rules. Miss Adderstone's eyes glinted spitefully as she took a tape measure from her pocket. She pulled the metal strip out and making exciting slurping noises as she sucked on her loose false teeth. She measured how far Molly's bath had gone over the red line painted round the sides of the tub. Molly's teeth chattered. Her knees were now turning blue and blotchy, and the palms of her hands began sweating, as they always did whenever she was excited or nervous. Trying to decide if you want to keep watching more of my YouTube videos or be in the live. I don't know. Up to you. Slurping noises, I know. Miss Adderstone shook the tape measure, dried it on Molly's shirt, then snapped it shut. Molly braced herself to face the wiry spinster, who, with her short gray hair and hairy face, looked more like a mister than a miss. Your bath is 30 centimeters deep, Miss Adderstone announced, allowing for the amount that had already been deceitfully run out while I was knocking at the door. I calculate that your bath was actually 40 centimeters deep. You know that baths are only supposed to be 10 centimeters deep. Your bath was 4 times that deep, so you have, in effect, used up your next 3 baths. So, Molly, you are forbidden to have a bath for the next 3 weeks. As for a punishment, Miss Adderstone picked up Molly's toothbrush. Molly's heart sank. She knew what was coming next. Miss Adderstone glared at Molly with her dull black eyes. Her face heaved in a monstrous way as her tongue dislodged her teeth and moved them around in her mouth before settling them back down on her gums. She thrust the toothbrush at Molly. This week you will be toilet monitor. I want the toilet spotless, Molly, and this is the brush you'll be using. And don't think you can get away with using the toilet brush, because I'll be watching you. Sweating in the bath? No, she had gotten out. She got out. Miss Adderstone gave one last satisfied suck on her teeth and left the room. Molly slumped down onto the side of the tub. So the something that she'd felt was going to happen tonight was simply trouble. She stared at her worn-out toothbrush, hoping that her friend Rocky would let her share his. As she picked at a loose thread on her balding old towel, she wondered what it would be like to be wrapped up in a fluffy white towel like the ones in TV ads. Softness is the sign. Everyone feels fine. Wash your towels in Cloud 9. Molly loved ads. They showed how comfortable and happy life could be, filled with friends who were always happy to see Molly when she visited them in her mind. Wrap yourself in luxury time, Cloud 9. Molly was shaken from her towel daydream as the evening assembly bell rang. Molly winced. She was late, as always. Always late, forever in trouble. The other kids called Molly Accident Zone, or Zono, because she was so clumsy and accident-prone. Her other nicknames were Drono, since people said Molly's voice made them want to fall asleep, and Bug Eyes, because her eyes were dark green and close together. Only Rocky, her best friend, and some of the younger orphans called her Molly. Molly, Molly! Molly put her pajamas on quickly and opened the bathroom door. Across the corridor, which was now being stampeded by children rushing downstairs, Molly saw Rocky's dark brown face, framed with black curls, beckoning her to hurry. As she crossed the corridor, 2 older boys, Roger Fibbin and Gordon Boyles, what a name, pushed her roughly aside. Get out of the way, Zono. Move it, Drono. Quick, Molly, said Rocky. We can't be late again. Addison will have a fit. Mind you, then, he added. She might choke on her false teeth. Molly smiled. Rocky always knew how to cheer her up. He knew her so well. I'm distracting sometimes. What? No, that's so crazy. Both Molly and Rocky had arrived at Hardwick House 10 summers ago. A white baby and a black baby. Molly had been found in a cardboard box on the doorstep, while Rocky had been found in a baby carriage in the parking lot behind Briarsville Police Station. Miss Adderson didn't like children. And of all children, she didn't like babies the most. To her, they were noisy, smelly, squelchy creatures, and the idea of changing a diaper filled her with disgust. So Miss Trinkleberry, a widow from the town, had been employed to look after Molly and Rocky. And because Miss Trinkleberry named children after the clothes or the carriers they had arrived in, like Moses Wicker, who'd been found in a wicker basket, or Satin Knight, who'd come dressed in a nightie with satin ribbons. I almost said satine. Molly and Rocky were given exotic names too. Molly's surname, Moon, had come from Moon's marshmallows, which had been printed in pink and green on the sides of her cardboard box cradle. When Miss Trinkleberry found a lolly stick in the box, she called the baby Lolly Moon. And after Miss Addlestone forbade Lolly as a name, Lolly Moon became Molly Moon. Rocky's name came directly from his red baby carriage. On its hood had been written, "The Scarlet Rocker." Rocky's deep, husky baby voice, together with his good looks, made Miss Trinkleberry say that one day he'd be a rock star, singing love songs to the ladies, and so she'd name the baby boy Rocky Scarlet. Mrs. Trinkleberry wasn't very clever, but her sweet center made up for her simple nature. And it was very lucky that she had taken care of Molly and Rocky when they were little, because with only bitter Miss Adderstone in charge, they might have grown up thinking the whole world was bad and have turned bad themselves. Instead, they were bounced on fat Miss Trinkleberry's knee, and they fell asleep to her singing. She made them laugh and wiped their eyes when they cried. And at night, if they ever asked why they had been doorstep babies, she told them that they were orphans because a naughty cuckoo had knocked them out of their nests. Then she sung them a mysterious lullaby. It went like this. Forgive, little birds, that brown cuckoo for pushing you out of your nests. It's what Mama Cuckoo taught it to do. She taught it that pushing is best. If Molly or Rocky ever felt cross with their parents, whomever they were, for abandoning them, Miss Trinkleberry's song would make them feel better. But Miss Trinkleberry didn't live at the orphanage anymore. As soon as Molly and Rocky were out of diapers, she'd been sent away. Now she came back only once a week to help with the cleaning and laundry, and the older children had to take care of the younger ones. Night was drawing in. In the distance, Molly heard the squawk of the cuckoo clock in Miss Adderstone's rooms striking 6. We're really late, she said, tearing her dressing gown from a hook on the door. She's going to have a tantrum, Rocky agreed, as they sprinted down the passage. Expertly, they skidded round a corner onto the polished linoleum floor and long jumped down the stairs. Quietly, they tiptoed across the checkered stone floor of the hall, past the TV room, and toward the oak-paneled assembly room. They slunk in. The sweet old British lady who played Cosmo's mom. That's how you imagine Miss Trinkleberry. I mean, that makes sense. Makes sense. 9 children, 4 of them under 7 years old, were lined up along the walls. Molly and Rocky joined the end of the line near 2 friendly 5-year-olds, Ruby and Jinx, hoping that Miss Adderstone hadn't reached their names on the register yet. Molly glanced at the unfriendly older faces opposite her. Hazel Hackersley, the meanest girl in the orphanage, narrowed her eyes at Molly. Gordon Boyles made the motion of cutting his throat with an imaginary knife. Ruby Abel, read Miss Adderstone. Yes, Miss Adderstone, piped up the tiny Ruby beside Molly. Gordon Boyles. Here, Miss Adderstone, said Gordon, making a face at Molly. Jinx Eames. What a name. Yes, Miss Adderstone, the little boy said. Roger Fibbin. Here, Miss Adderstone, said the tall, thin boy who stood next to Gordon, eyeing Molly maliciously. Hazel Hackersley? Here, Miss Adderstone. Molly was relieved. Her name was next. Gary Oakley? Here, Miss Adderstone, said 7-year-old Gary, thrusting his hand into his pocket where he could feel his pet mouse trying to escape. Cynthia Redmond? Here, Miss Adderstone, said Cynthia, winking at Hazel. Molly wondered when her own name would pop up. Miss Adderstone seemed to have skipped it. Craig Redmond? Here, Miss Adderstone, grunted Cynthia's twin. Gemma Patel? Here, Miss Adderstone. Rocky Scarlet? Here, Rocky said. Miss Adderstone slammed the registers shut. As usual, Molly Moon is not here. I'm here now, Miss Adderstone. Molly could hardly believe it. Miss Adderstone must have read her name out first to intentionally catch her out. What a bitch. Now doesn't count, said Miss Adderstone, her lips twitching. You will be on dishwashing duty tonight. Edna will be pleased to have the night off. Molly squeezed her eyes tight shut with regret. After the last blessing prayer, the dinner gong sounded, and the heavy dining room door swung open. The orphans shuffled through it, welcomed tonight by the disgusting smell of old fish. They'd seen the fish earlier that week, lying in plastic crates in the alley outside the kitchen, scuttling with flies and beetles. And everyone knew that Edna, the orphanage cook, would have baked the fish in a nice, thick, greasy cheese and nut sauce to disguise its rotten taste, a trick that she'd learned in the Navy. There Edna stood now, broad and muscular, with her curly gray hair and her flattened nose, ready to make sure every child ate up. With the tattoo of a sailor on her thigh, although this was only a rumor, and her terrible language, Edna was like a grumpy pirate. Hello. Hi, Sophie. Every single child felt nervous and sick as they stood in line while Edna slopped out smelly helplings. I'm allergic to fish, Edna, said Molly. Load a bleedin' codswallop, came Edna's gruff reply, as she wiped her nose on her overall sleeve and then dolloped out an extra helping. It is codswallop, Molly whispered to Rocky, looking down at her fish. The idea that something special might happen to her tonight was now entirely gone. Instead, the evening was just going to be like all the others. There would be nothing good to eat, no treats, and the hours before bedtime would be laced with trouble. Sometimes when bad luck comes your way, you think it will never end. Molly Moon often felt this way about her luck, which wasn't surprising since she was so often in trouble. If only she'd known that her luck was about to change, she might have enjoyed the following day, for by the end of it all sorts of wonderful things were going to happen to her. But that morning, from the moment she opened her eyes, Molly's day started to go wrong. First she was woken with a shock by a bell ringing loudly in her ear. Big-boned Hazel, Miss Adderstone's pet, liked to wake Molly up as violently as possible. It's the cross-country races at school today, Bog Eyes, and that 50-word spelling test, she announced, scraping her black hair back with her hairband. Also, I want to note that the page has a spiral on it. We love to see it. We love to see it. She walked away, swinging her bell happily, delighted to have ruined Molly's morning. Rocky hadn't remembered the test either. He and Molly tried to catch up over breakfast, only to have their books confiscated by Miss Adderstone. Then Miss Adderstone took great delight in watching Molly clean the toilet with her toothbrush. By 8:30, Molly was feeling sick. The morning didn't improve on the way to school. On the road, one of the village boys threw a water bomb at Hazel. When she ducked, the water bomb hit Molly, exploding on impact and soaking her. As a result, Molly and Rocky missed assembly because they were trying to dry Molly's sweater and shirt on the radiator in the girls' locker room. They were also late for their first class. "Late," said Miss Toadley, their teacher, shouted as they entered the classroom. She pushed them to 2 worm-eaten desks in the front row. "And you missed assembly. I shall give you punishments later." Tissue! Miss Toadley had a small sneezing fit, which was what always happened whenever she got worked up. Molly sighed. More punishments. Molly hated Mrs. Toadsley, and she was glad that she looked so repulsive, blubbery-faced and half-bald, with a belly like a water-filled rubber bag. Her appearance served her right. Pyrals? I know. Pages. Incredible. Mrs. Toadley's sneezing fits were usually good for cheating, but cheating together in today's spelling test was out of the question, as neither Molly nor Rocky knew the answers. The test was from the land of gobbledygook. Not only did the class have to spell the words, they also had to give their meanings. Molly blundered through it, guessing the answers. When they had finished, Miss Toadley collected the tests and set to work marking them. She started with Molly's. Within seconds, her squealy, high-pitched voice whistled through the classroom, followed by a succession of loud sneezes. Molly's stomach went tight as yet another telling off began. "You got notorious wrong." "At the shoe!" "There's no E in it, and it actually means famous in a bad way. I must say that's you all over, isn't it, Molly? Molly's strength began to crack. After all, a person can only take so much battering. She put on her best anti-tell-off armor and switched off. She just fucking dissociated. She had to stop Miss Toadley's cruel tongue hurting her. In her mind, she floated away from the classroom until Mrs. Toadley's ghastly tones were tiny and distant, as if coming down a telephone line, and the squirrely pattern on her stretchy skirt became a purplish-orange blur. She's really dissociating. That's literally how the... Hang on. That's literally how the sneezes are. Molly Moon, will you listen to me for once, you useless girl? Molly snapped back to the classroom. I am sorry if I have disappointed you, Miss Toadley. I'll try harder next time. Miss Toadley snorted and sneezed and sat down. Molly gave the morning 10 out of 10 for dreadfulness, but in the afternoon something much worse happened. After lunch, Molly's class changed for the cross-country race. Molly couldn't find one of her sneakers, and she and Rocky had to look all over for it. Droplets of rain ran down the locker room windows as they searched. By the time they'd found it, the others were a long way ahead, and it was pouring rain. Rocky wanted to catch up, but the slippery ground made progress difficult. After running through sludgy woods, Molly needed a break, so they sat down on a bench under a tree for a little rest. Their sneakers were sodden, and their legs were cold and wet. Come on, Rocky said. Let's start again, otherwise we'll be way behind. Why don't we just go back, suggested Molly. Molly, said Rocky irritedly, do you want to get into trouble? You're crazy. I'm not crazy, I just don't like running. Oh, come on, Molly, let's keep going. No, I just don't feel like it. Rocky tilted his head and looked searchingly at her. He'd been late to school that morning because of Molly, and now she wanted them to get into more trouble. Molly, he said, exasperated, if you don't come, they'll probably make us go round twice. Why don't you just try? Because I'm no good at it, and I don't want to. Rocky stared at her. You could be good at running, you know, if you tried. If you got better at running, you'd like it, but you won't even try. Rocky looked up at the rain clouds above him. It's the same with lots of things we do. If you're not good at them, you just give up. And then you're not good at them more, so you don't try more. And then you're even worse at them, and then, oh, shut up, Rocky. Molly was tired, and the last thing she wanted was a lecture from her best friend. In fact, she was shocked that Rocky should bother. He was normally so easygoing and tolerant. If anything annoyed him, he'd just ignore it or wander away from it. And then, continued Rocky, you get into trouble. He took a big, fed-up breath. And you know what? I'm sick of you being in trouble. It's as if you like it. Oof. Rough. It's as if you want to get yourself in more and more unpopular. Molly's heart jolted in amazement at as his unexpected words stung her. Rocky never criticized her. Molly was furious. You're not so popular yourself, Rock Scarlet, she retorted. That's because I'm usually with you, Rocky said, matter-of-factly. Oof. Maybe, actually, it's because no one likes you much either, Molly snapped. I mean, you're not perfect. You're so dreamy it's like you live on a different planet. You're not exactly reliable. Sometimes I have to wait hours for you to turn up. Like yesterday, I waited ages for you by the school lockers. And you're so secretive you're almost sneaky. I mean, where were you yesterday after school? Recently you've been disappearing all the time. People may think I'm weird, but they think you're just as strange. You're like a weird wandering minstrel. Still, they like me more than they like you, that's for sure, Rocky muttered. What did you say? I said Rocky loudly, they like me more than they like you. Molly stood up, giving Rocky the filthiest look she could. I'm going, she said. Now that I know you think you're so much better than me. And you know what, Rocky? You can run on and catch up with the others. Go and make yourself more popular. Don't let me hold you back. Oh, don't get so worked up. I was only trying to help you, said Rocky, frowning. I was trying to help? Victim blaming from Rocky. Yeah, really. But Molly was enraged. It was as if something inside her had suddenly broken. She knew she was less popular than Rocky, but she didn't want to hear it. It was true that everyone bullied her, and no one ever bullied Rocky. He was untouchable, confident, difficult to upset, and happy with himself. Hazel and her gang steered clear of him, and he had plenty of friends at school. Molly hated him now for betraying her. She glared at him, and he puffed his cheeks out at her with an "oh, you drive me crazy" way. Same to you too, and you look like a stupid blowfish like that. Maybe some of your new friends will find it clever. As she stamped away from him, she yelled, I hate this place. In fact, I can't think of a worse place to be in the world. My life is just horrible. Their friendship sounds a little rocky. Oh my god. Molly blasted her way. Oh, we got another spiral page. Molly blasted her way through the school woods, the wet, ferny undergrowth slapping at her legs. She picked up a stick and thrashed the plants. The first hairy fern she came to was Miss Adderstone. Shwip! The stick zipped through the air and cut off her head. Old cow, Molly muttered. A dark green creeper was Edna. Shwip! Filthy old bag! She came to the base of a large yew tree. Poisonous red berries were rotting on the ground around it, and a huge yellow fungus was growing revoltingly on its trunk. Ah, Mrs. Toadley. Thwack, thwack. Molly felt a little better when she had sliced Miss Toadley into smelly bits. Notorious yourself, she said. Wow, really got him there. Sitting down on a tree stump, Molly kicked at the nettle. Oh. My TikTok live just got removed for hate speech and hateful behaviors. Yeah? Okay. So am I not going to be able to, Wow, yeah. My TikTok live is suspended, so rip to TikTok, I guess. Ripperoni. Oh my god. Molly kicked at a nettle. Take that, Rocky, she said. The nettle bounced back and stung her ankle. I know. I don't know what it... That's really stupid. Oh my god. Yeah, I put in an appeal, but it's gonna take a bit to... Oh well, whatever. That was something. Take that, Rocky, she said. The nettle bounced back and stung her ankle. As Molly found a dock leaf and rubbed it on the nettle sting, she thought that maybe Rocky had been right, a bit. But she still felt cross with him. After all, she never nagged him. Sometimes if he was singing one of his songs, she'd had to shake him to get his attention. She didn't expect him to change his habits. Molly had thought Rocky liked her exactly as she was, so it was a big shock to discover that he disliked even a part of her. A bigger shock to see him side with the others. She wondered how often he'd been resentful of her without saying anything. He'd been wandering off a lot lately. Had he been avoiding her? Molly's mind burned. What was it he had said? That she never tried anything, but she acted out acts with him brilliantly. She tried at those. Maybe she should find something else to be good at. That would show him. Molly strode on through the woods, feeling very sorry for herself. The trees cleared, and she stood in the wind on the bare hillside, looking down at a small town of Briarsville. There was the school, and past it the high street, town hall, and the houses. Everything glistened from the afternoon rain. Cars that looked the size of guinea pigs beetled through its snaking streets. Molly wished that one of those cars were coming to pick her up, to drive her home to a cozy house. She thought how lucky children who had parents were. However bad their day, they always had a friendly home to return to. Molly diverted her thoughts to the giant billboard that stood on the edge of the town, displaying a different advertisement every month. Today, the message beaming into everyone's lives was, "Be cool, drink Cube." The picture on the huge board was of a man on a beach, wearing sunglasses, drinking a can of Cube. The famous Cube can flashed its gold and orange stripes, as if Cube, not the sun, lit up the world. Molly liked the way it was hot-looking, and yet had a cool drink inside. Beautiful beach people crowded adoringly round the man who was drinking. They all had wonderful white teeth, but the whitest teeth of all belonged to the guy with the can of Cube. It's Cube with a Q, actually. With a Q. Cube. Molly loved Cube ads. She felt she'd practically walked on the white sandy beach where this one was set, and knew the glamorous people who played there. She knew they were actors and that the scene was fabricated, but she also trusted that this world of theirs existed. One day she'd escape from the misery of Hardwick House to begin a new life, a fun-filled life like the lives of the people in her favorite ads, but it would be real. Molly had tasted Cube once when Miss Trinkleberry had brought in a few cans of it, but the cans had been shared, so she'd only had a few mouthfuls. With its minty, fruity taste, it certainly was different. As Molly walked into the town, she thought of how great it would be if simply drinking one can of Cube could make a person popular. She'd love to be popular like the glossy people on the poster. How Molly wished she was rich and beautiful too. As it was, she was poor, weird-looking, and unpopular, a nobody. Hydrating. Cheers. Down the hill Molly walked, toward the town library. She was very fond of the old disorganized library. It was peaceful, and its thick photographic books gave her faraway places to dream about. Both Rocky and Molly loved it there. The librarian was always too busy reading or sorting books to bother them. In fact, it was the one place where Molly wasn't the butt of a telling off, and she could relax in her secret place. She climbed the granite steps and passed the stone lions at the top, going into the foyer. The sweet smell of the wooden floor polish made her feel instantly 10 times calmer. She wiped her feet and padded over to the library bulletin board, where there were messages from the outside world. This week there was somebody trying to sell a waterbed, and somebody else trying to find homes for kittens. There were notices about yoga courses, tango lessons, cooking classes, and sponsored walks. The biggest notice of all was for the Briarsville Children's Talent Competition the following weekend. This reminded her of Rocky, since he was entering with one of the songs he'd written. Molly hoped he'd win, but then remembering she was still cross with him, she immediately stopped herself hoping. Quietly, she opened the door of the library. The librarian was sitting at her desk reading a book. She glanced up at Molly and smiled. Hello," she said, her kind blue eyes twinkling through her glasses. "When I saw your school jacket through the doors, I thought it was your friend. He's been in here a lot lately. It's nice to see you again." Molly smiled back. "Thanks," she said. The librarian's friendliness made her feel funny. Molly wasn't used to grown-ups being kind to her. Awkwardly, she turned away from the woman's gaze and started to read the pamphlets that were stacked in front of the newspaper table. So it was the library where Rocky had been secretly slopping off to. Molly wondered again if it was because he was trying to avoid her. Then she decided to quit worrying and walked towards the rows of bookshelves. She passed along the tall aisles of books, A to C, D to F. The shelves were crammed with books, often too deep. Some books, Molly thought, hadn't been looked at for ages. She passed the G to I books, then the J to L's, M to P, Q to S, T to W, and X to Z. Z. Molly's favorite place. The X to Z section was all the way at the far end of the library, where the room narrowed and there was space for only a short shelf. In between the shelf and the wall was a snug place warmed by an underfloor pipe and lit by its own light bulb. The carpet was less worn out, as hardly anyone ever went there, and because there weren't many authors or subjects that started with X, Y, or Z. Occasionally people would come to that aisle for zoology or books by an author whose name began with Z, but not very often. Molly took off her jacket and lay down, her head by Y and her feet by Z. The floor was warm, and the distant, rhythmical thudding of the building's boiler, along with the librarian's soothing voice on the phone, helped Molly to breathe peacefully, and soon she was lying on the floor, imagining herself floating in space again. Then she drifted off. A rumpus woke her up. Someone, a man with an American accent, was in a terrible temper, and his gruff voice was getting louder and louder by the second. The ecstasy section? Oh my god. I cannot believe this, the speaker bellowed. I mean, this is unbelievable. I made a deal with you a few days ago on the phone. I wired you the money for the book, then I fly over from Chicago to get it. 4,000 miles I've come, and you, meanwhile, you go and lose it. I mean, what kind of badly run institution is this? This was a very strange sensation for Molly. Someone else was getting a telling off. The librarian's wren-like voice piped up nervously. I'm sorry, Professor Knockman. I really can't think what could have happened to it. I saw the book with my own eyes last week. I can only assume it's been taken out by someone, although it's always been in the restricted section, so that shouldn't have... Oh dear, let me look in the files. Molly peeped through the shelves to see who was making a fuss. At the main desk, the librarian was frantically flicking through the box file, searching beseechingly at the cards, as if begging one of them to explain where the missing book had gone. Molly knew what she felt like. It's by Logan, you said? She asked in a worried voice. Logan, the cross voice corrected her, and the title begins with H. Molly got onto her knees to peer through a higher shelf to see what this man looked like. There he was. There was his middle, a barrel-like stomach and a Hawaiian shirt with palm trees and pineapples on it. Molly moved up a level. The shirt was short-sleeved, and on his hairy arm, the man wore an expensive-looking gold watch. His hands were... I'm losing the ability to read. His hands were small and fat, while his fingernails were disgustingly long. He strummed the desk impatiently. Molly moved up one more shelf. His nose was upturned, and his face was round with a double chin. His black greasy hair started halfway back across his head and hung down to his shoulders. His beard was small, sharp, black triangle just under his bottom lip, and his mustache was clipped and oiled. His eyes were bulbous, and his face was sunburned. In all, he looked like a very ugly sea lion. And, Molly thought, very unlike how she imagined a professor should look. So, he asked belligerently, have you found it yet? Well, no, I'm terribly sorry, Professor Knockham. It seems that it hasn't been lent out. Oh my goodness. Oh, this is really very embarrassing. The librarian started to scrabble around in her drawer. Professor Knockman, perhaps for now you ought to take your check back? I don't want to take my check back, boomed the ugly man. What sort of lousy librarian are you, losing books? He stormed over to the G to I aisle. Some idiot probably put it away in the wrong place. The man waddled through the aisles, huffing and sweating. Now he was just on the other side of her bookshelf, so close that Molly could have touched him. He smelled of old hamburger and tobacco. Around his fat neck on a gold chain hung a scorpion medallion. The scorpion had a diamond for an eye, which caught the light and winked at Molly. The professor's pudgy, taloned finger ran menacingly around the top of the T to W books. Okay, he suddenly announced. Okay, it's obviously not here, so what we're going to do is this. You, he said, marching back to the librarian's desk, pointing aggressively so that his fingernail almost poked her between the eyes. You are going to check with your colleagues and find out what happened to my book. As soon as you know, you'll call me. He pulled a snakeskin wallet from his back pocket, and out of that a business card. I'm staying at the Briarsville Hotel. You will telephone me and keep me updated, and you will get the book back as a matter of priority. I need this book for very important scientific research. My museum will be horrified to hear how it's been mislaid. Have I made myself clear? Yes, Professor. Diamond for eye. The professor then picked up a sheepskin coat and grunting angrily left the library. The librarian bit her lip and then started adjusting the pins in her bun. Molly sat on the floor. In front of her, a big Y denoted the beginning of the Y shelves. Why? Why was that ugly man so keen to get that book? It must be a very interesting book. More interesting, Molly supposed, than yatching or yodeling or hypnotism. Hypnotism? Molly looked at the book in front of her. Its cover had been ripped, so the first letter of the title had been removed. In a blinding flash, Molly realized that the missing letter had been an H. Could this be the missing book? Quickly, she pulled the heavy, leather-bound book from the shelf, and checking furtively that no one was watching, she opened the cover. There, in an old-fashioned type, were the words, Hypnotism, an Ancient Art Explained by Dr. H. Logan, published by Arkwright & Sons, 1908. Molly didn't need to look any further. She quietly shut the book, wrapped it in her jacket, and left the library too. And that was the beginning of the change in Molly Moon's life. With growing excitement, Molly walked back through the streets of Briarsville, across the fields to the orphanage. It was only tea time, but the gray November light was fading. Pheasants chirruped loudly in the woods as they settled to roost, and rabbits darted for cover as Molly walked by. When she arrived at Hardwick House, the windows of the stone building were already aglow from lights within. Molly could make out, behind the thin curtain in the second-floor window, the wizened silhouette of Miss Adderstone as she petted her bad-tempered pug dog, Petula. I think I mentally always read that as, like, Petunia. Molly smiled to herself and pushed open the iron gates. As she walked across the gravel, the side door of the orphanage opened. It was Miss Trinkleberry. She had thrown her plump arms around Molly and hugged her. "Oh, hello, Molly Poppet. You're back. At least I didn't miss you already. How are you? Are you all right?" "Yeah, just about," said Molly, giving her a hug back. Molly would have loved to tell Miss Trinkleberry about the book, but she decided it was better not to. "How are you?" "Oh, good as ever. Look, I saved you a cake." Miss Trinkleberry reached into her flowery knitting bag and rummaged about. "Here you go," she said, passing Molly a wax paper package. "It's chocolate cupcake. Made some last night." The glass in her spectacles flashed as they caught the light coming from the hall. "But don't let Miss You-Know-Who catch you with it." "Oh, thank you," Molly said appreciatively. "Must be going now, dear," she said, pulling her old crocheted coat tightly around her. "Keep warm, Chuck. See you in a week." With that, Miss Trinkleberry set off for town, and Molly went inside. She nipped up to her bedroom, and since everyone else was at tea, had time to eat her cupcake. She hid the book under her mattress. Then she went down to the dining room and sat by herself at a small table by the fireplace. Molly usually had tea with Rocky, but he wasn't there. She ate her bread and margarine, warily watching Hazel at the large table on the other side of the room. She was showing off because she'd won the cross-country race. Her beefy legs were covered in mud. Her big face was still red from all the exertion. Molly knew that when Hazel saw her alone, a bullying session would begin. Hazel would make a few vicious comments and Molly would pretend not to care. Hazel's taunts would become more malicious until she pierced Molly's shell. Molly might blush, or her face might twitch, or worse, she might get a lump in her throat and her eyes might water. Quickly, Molly stuffed the last of her bread into her mouth and prepared to leave. But she was too late. Hazel shouted, "Look, everybody, Zono's finally made it. Did you fall in a puddle, Drono? Or was there a frog in the path that frightened you? Or did your weird, spammy legs snap?" Molly smiled sarcastically, trying to shake the insults off. Is that supposed to be a cool smile? Asked Hazel with a sneer. Look, everybody, Bog Eyes is trying to look cool. Molly hated Hazel. Although she hadn't always. Hazel arrived at the orphanage 4 years ago. Aged 8. Her bankrupt parents had been killed in a car crash, leaving her with nothing, not even relations. And so, alone and destitute, she'd been sent to Hardwick House. Molly had done her best to make Hazel feel welcome, but very soon she'd realized that Hazel didn't want her friendship. Hazel had pushed Molly up against a wall and explained to her that she was better than her. She had known a wonderful family life, and she remembered her parents. She hadn't been dropped like rubbish on the doorstep. She'd come there because of a tragic twist of fate that had killed her loving parents, and ever since then Hazel had teased, taunted, and bullied Molly. I said, is that supposed to be a cool smile? Repeated Hazel. Maybe a farmer attacked her because she looks like a bog-eyed rat, suggested skinny Roger Fibbin. He was Hazel's informant, her spy. As Molly looked at him, in his crisp white shirt with his tidy hair, she thought how much he looked like a shrunken adult. His sharp nose and cold spying eyes were sinister. Or maybe a rat attacked her because her sweaty hands stink so much, piped up muscly Gordon Boyles. He had tattooed each of his fingers using a compass and ink. The fingers on his left fist read G-O-R-D, and the fingers on his right fist read King. From where she was sitting, Molly could just read King Gord. As Gordon took a bite of his tea cake, Molly was reminded of his trademark trick of taking a fresh slice of bread and blowing his nose in it, and making what he'd call a snot sandwich, which he'd then eat. Or did Rocky and you sit in the bushes planning your wedding? Jibed Hazel. All at once, Molly smiled. It was a smile that came from an excitement deep inside her, and from the hopes already kindled in her about what she would be able to do if she learned how to hypnotize people. Hazel and her posse just better watch out. Without a word, Molly stood up and left the room. After tea, all the children had to rest on their beds, except for those who were allowed to practice their acts for the Briarsville Children's Talent Competition. Molly was itching to start reading the hypnotism book, but couldn't risk it, as Cynthia was reading a comic on the bed beside her. The minutes crawled by. Molly heard Rocky's husky voice, but she still felt angry about what he'd said, so she didn't go and see him. Then came homework hour. It felt like homework year. Miss Adderstone's cuckoo clock struck 6. At assembly, Molly ignored Rocky, and so Rocky ignored Molly. After singing a hymn to tape-recorded organ music, Miss Adderstone, with Petula yapping under her arm, made some announcements. The first was that Molly would be on vacuuming duty for a week since she had failed to complete the cross-country race. The second was that some American visitors were coming the next day. They will be arriving at 4 o'clock. May I remind you that they are interested in adopting one of you, strangely enough. If you remember, the last Americans to come here left empty-handed. Do not let me down this time. I'd like to get rid of one of you at least. They won't be interested in adopting a dirty, flea-bitten rat runt. Miss Adderstone's eyes hovered on Molly, so clean up. Only a respectable child will be chosen. Some of you, of course, don't need to be told this. Every child in the room felt excited when they heard this news. Molly even detected a glimmer of hope in Hazel's eyes. At supper, Molly sat by herself, eating a bruised apple. Finally, when she thought she was about to explode from curiosity, she found a moment when the bedroom was empty. Quickly taking the book from under her mattress, she hid it in her laundry bag and set off for the laundry rooms. Hades means hell in Greek. Hades was the orphanage name for the laundry rooms, which were deep in the bowels of the building. Molly made her way down to them now, looking as if she was off to do some washing. The cellar was dark and musty with low ceilings. The walls were lined with rusty pipes that hung with drying clothes. At the far end were some old porcelain sinks with limescale-covered plug holes where the children washed their dirty clothes. Molly found a warm spot under a light bulb, below some drying pipes, and bursting with anticipation, she reached inside her laundry bag. All her life, Molly had yearned to be special. She fantasized that she was special and that somehow something miraculous would happen to her. Deep down inside, she felt that one day, a brilliant Molly Moon would burst out and show everyone at the Hardwick house that she really was a somebody. Yesterday she'd thought something important was going to happen. Maybe the important thing was one day late. All evening, Molly had wondered whether this book was going to make her dreams come true. So, it was with trepidation and a timid hand that she slowly lifted the dry leather cover of the old book, and it opened with a creak. There was the first page again. Hypnotism, an ancient art explained. Molly turned to the next page. What she read made her tingle from head to toe. Dear reader, welcome to the wonderful world of hypnotism, and congratulations for making the wise decision to open this book. You are about to depart on an incredible journey. If you put into practice the following nuggets of wisdom, you will find that the world is full of golden opportunities. Bon voyage and bonne chance. Sincerely, Dr. H. Logan, Briarsville, February 3rd, 1908. Molly noticed with amazement that Dr. Logan had come from Briarsville. This was extraordinary, as sleepy Briarsville didn't have many interesting people to boast of. She eagerly turned the page. Introduction. You have probably heard often enough of the ancient art of hypnotism. Perhaps you have seen a performing hypnotist in a traveling fair, hypnotizing members of the audience, getting them to behave in a peculiar way and amusing spectators. Maybe you have read the statements of how people have been hypnotized for operations so they feel no pain. Hypnotism is a great art form, and like other art forms, hypnotism is something that most people can learn if they are patient and practice hard. A few students of hypnotism will have a natural talent. Even fewer will have a real gift. Will you be one of the gifted few? Read on. Molly's hands began to sweat. Hypnotism, the book read, was given its name by the ancient Greeks. Hypnos means sleep in Greek. Hypnotists have practiced since the earliest of times. Hypnotism is also known as mesmerism, a word that comes from the name of a doctor called Franz Mesmer. He was born in 1734 and died in 1815, and his chief pursuit in life was the art of hypnotism. When a person is under the powers of a hypnotist, he is in a trance. People go into trances all the time without realizing it. When you put your pen down, for instance, and 1 minute later you can't remember where you put it, you can't remember because you were in a small trance. Daydreaming is another form of entering trance. People daydreaming are in a world of their own. When they come out of their daydream trance, they often don't know what people around them have been saying or doing. In trances, people's thoughts float away from the noisy world into quieter places of the mind. Molly thought of the trick she had learned, of drifting off into space and looking down at the world, of turning herself off when people were shouting at her. Maybe, without knowing it, she had been putting herself into a trance. The book continued. Our minds like to relax in this way, as a rest from thinking. Trances are very normal things. When Molly read the next sentence, her heart skipped a beat. If you are good at going into trances, chances are you will be very good at hypnotism. Hungrily, she read on. What a hypnotist does is bring people into trances and then keep them there by talking to them in a hypnotic way. When the person is in a deep trance, a sort of wide-awake sleep, the hypnotist can then suggest things that the person should think or do. For instance, the hypnotist might say, when you wake up, you will not want to smoke another pipe, or when you wake up, you will no longer feel afraid of riding in automobiles. Molly put the book down for a moment. Or, she thought aloud, when you wake up, you will think you are a monkey. Molly smiled as ideas began to jostle through her head. Then a shiver of suspicion stopped her in her tracks. Was this book for real, or was it written by a madman? Then she remembered the wart-hoggy man in the library. He said he traveled all the way from America just to find this book. The professor must believe that the secrets contained between its covers were extremely valuable. It must be very, very special. Molly is dissociating. She surely is. Perhaps, Molly said to herself, perhaps she chanced upon a real treasure. Eagerly, she looked at the table of contents. Chapter 1, Practice on Yourself. Chapter 2, Hypnotizing Animals. Chapter 3, Hypnotizing Others. Chapter 4, Pendulum Hypnosis. Chapter 5, Hypnotizing Small Groups of People. Chapter 6, How to Hypnotize a Crowd. Chapter 7, Hypnotizing Using the Voice Alone. Chapter 8, Long Distance Hypnosis. And Chapter 9, Amazing Feats of Hypnosis. The book was peppered with drawings of hypnotized people in Edwardian clothes. There was a picture of a woman lying flat with only a chair under her head and one under her feet. She was called the Human Plank. There were lots of diagrams of a man making strange faces. One a puffed up blowfish face, another where his eyes were turned upward, showing their whites. Yuck, disgusting, Molly thought. As she turned the thick pages of the heavy old book, Molly came to the end of Chapter 6 and realized it was immediately followed by Chapter 9. 2 chapters. Chapter 7, Hypnotizing Using the Voice Alone, and Chapter 8, Long Distance Hypnosis, had been carefully removed. Molly wondered who'd taken these pages, and whether they'd gone missing years ago or only recently. It was impossible to tell. Near the end of the book was a brownish photograph. It was of a man with curly hair and glasses and a bulbous nose. Dr. Logan, the world's most famous hypnotist, it said underneath. Molly was relieved to see that you obviously didn't need to be a great beauty to be a hypnotist. Eagerly, she flicked back to the first chapter, Practice on Yourself. The first section was Voice. It read, a hypnotist's voice must be gentle, calm, lulling, like a mother's hand rocking a baby to sleep, so the hypnotist's voice must lull the subject into a trance. This sounded too good to be true. Molly had been labeled with the nickname Drono because people said her voice made them want to go to sleep. Now this ability, instead of being something to be ashamed of, felt like a talent to boast about. The book went on. Here are some exercises which must be said slowly and steadily. Practice them. Oh, thank you. Molly read the sentences out loud. I have a wonderful, calm voice. I am calm and persuasive. My voice is very... All of a sudden, she heard loud steps. She shut the book quickly and slipped it into her laundry bag. Hazel was coming into Hades. She stamped noisily into the pipe room with her tap shoes still on. Ugh, what are you doing here, weirdo? I heard you trying to sing. Give up, your voice is flat. Just singing while I find my socks, said Molly. More like you're down here thinking about how everyone dislikes you. Hazel collected her clothes from a pipe and turned to look at Molly. You're like a sock, aren't you, Drono? A worn-out, stinking, unwanted, weird sock. Why don't you enter the talent competition as a sock? Okay. When Molly didn't react, Hazel added, or better still, enter as the ugliest person in the world. And shuddering, she added, ugh, I bet your parents were ugly, bog eyes. With a satisfied smirk, she turned and walked away. Molly watched her go. She smiled to herself, and under her breath she said, just you wait, Hazel Hackersley. Just you wait. The next day was Friday. Molly had awakened early, smiling from a dream that she was a world-famous hypnotist. Since then, she had been concocting a daring plan. She had no intention of going to school. She couldn't possibly go and sit there and dire Dishwater Toadley's lessons while the book with all its secrets waiting to be learned lay under her mattress. Besides, she couldn't leave the book unguarded. Snoopy Miss Adderstone might find it. When the morning bell went, she lay still and kept her eyes shut even when Rocky came to visit her. When Hazel rang the bell in Molly's ear and pulled her covers off, Molly just lay listlessly in her bed. Brain not working again, bog eyes? Hazel jeered. I don't feel very well, Molly moaned. Molly missed breakfast. When she was sure everyone was downstairs, she swung into action. Jumping out of the bed, she opened the bedroom window and scraped some green mildew off the stone wall into a plastic soap dish. Then she carefully mashed the chunks of green mold into a fine powder. She applied the powder to her face, giving her a sickly green tinge. Afterwards, she wiped the dish and put it back by the sink. Next, she crept along to the infirmary. There was an electric kettle which Molly switched on. A moment later, she filled a glass half full with boiling water and hidden it under a low armchair. Then she grabbed a metal sick bowl and placed it high up top on top of the cupboard next to the chair. Back in the bedroom, Molly rifled through her satchel and found a packet of emergency ketchup, which she'd saved for sandwiches. With this in her pajama pocket, she got back into bed, her trap set. People started to return from breakfast. Gordon Boyles plodded into Molly's room. "Sick? Some hope," he said. Molly heard something flicked and felt something small, nasty, and damp land on her neck before Gordon left. Then Molly recognized the voices of Gary and Gemma as they came to see her. "Bet she caught a cold. Maybe she did fall in a puddle yesterday," whispered Gemma. "Poor Molly. She's probably sick because the big kids are nasty to her," said Gary. Shall we go and feed your mouse?" Finally, Miss Adderstone stomped in. "Sick, I hear," she said unsympathetically. "Well, you'd better come to the infirmary." She shook Molly, who pretended to wake up. Acting as headachy and fluey as possible, Molly followed Miss Adderstone down the shabby corridor and past other children who'd come out of the rooms to stare at her. Miss Adderstone made Molly sit in the infirmary armchair, taking a key from the metal chatelaine that hung around her. I know what that is now. Oh my god. The roll being up, incredible. She opened a drawer, found the thermometer, and jabbed it into Molly's mouth. Molly's sweaty fingers were crossed tightly behind her back as she hoped madly for Miss Adderstone to leave the room. Seconds later, her wish was granted. "I'll be back in 5 minutes. We'll see if you're sick." Sucking her false teeth, Miss Adderstone marched out. As soon as Miss Adderstone was safely away, Molly found her glass of water, once boiling, now very hot, and put the thermometer in it. She watched anxiously, her heart beating fast, as the mercury rose up the stalk. A temperature of 103 degrees should convince Miss Adderstone that she was unwell. But just to be sure, Molly tore open a ketchup packet before putting it back into her pocket. Her hands were trembling with nerves. In another minute, she heard the sucking noises and Miss Adderstone's steps coming back. Molly hung her head, trying to look as ill as she could. Miss Adderstone entered, and without speaking, roughly pulled the thermometer from Molly's mouth. As Miss Adderstone pushed her glasses up the ridge of her nose to inspect the thermometer, Molly started to grimace. "Miss Adderstone," she groaned, making heaving movements with her body, "I think I'm going to be sick." Miss Adderstone looked as though she thought she was going to be sprayed by a skunk. Urgently, she turned to get the sick bowl. "Where's the—" she began to ask. Then she saw it up high in the cupboard where Molly had put it. Molly was making retching noises. While Miss Adderstone stood on a stool to reach the bowl, Molly squirted some of the ketchup into her mouth and took a mouthful of water too. When Miss Adderstone stepped down with the sick bowl in hand, Molly was ready. She seized the bowl. Bleh! The fake pink sick splattered onto the steel. After a few more retches, I'm not gonna make actual noises. Molly felt satisfied that the performance had been very convincing. "Sorry, Miss Adderstone," she said feebly. Miss Adderstone looked appalled. Taking a step back, she consulted the thermometer again. "Collect your things at once. Dressing gown, toothbrush." Miss Adderstone faltered. "Get your belongings, then go to the sanatorium. You've got a temperature of 103 degrees. Trust you, I hope we don't all catch it. And wash that filthy bowl." Molly felt like cheering and punching the air. So thrilled was she to have fooled Miss Adderstone, but she didn't show it. She shuffled dolefully back to the bedroom, put on her thin dressing gown and her slippers, took a cardigan from her drawer as well as her laundry bag, which of course held the hypnotism book. Then she made her way up the bottle green linoleum staircase. Up one flight, she passed the landing to Miss Adderstone's apartment, with its heavy mahogany furniture and its severe portrait of Miss Adderstone herself. Petula's purple cushion lay on the floor, and next to it sat a collection of small flint stones and pieces of gravel. It was Petula's particular habit to suck stones. Beside the stones was a saucer full of chocolate cookies. Molly continued up one more flight to the sanatorium room.
She opened the door, and since November day was a sunny one, found it was warm inside. It wasn't a proper sanatorium with lots of rooms and beds. It was just one little attic room. Dust motes danced through the shafts of light that poured through the window, and dead flies lay at the bottom of the window pane. A brass bed stood against the yellow wall. Molly took the horrible plastic bottom sheet off its mattress, since she wasn't planning to wet the bed. Then she settled down to read. Molly decided to skip the rest of chapter 1, Practice on Yourself, as she had reckoned that she'd already spent years learning how to dream and going into trances. She instead turned to chapter 2. Hypnotizing Animals. Pedro's purple cushion. Oh my god. Now that you have mastered the art of entering a trance, you are ready to hypnotize an animal. Hypnotizing animals is a difficult art, more difficult than hypnotizing human beings. But if you achieve what I call the fusion feeling when you are hypnotizing animals, you will recognize the fusion feeling later when you are hypnotizing people, and that will be very useful to you. If you don't get the fusion feeling, animals and people are not properly hypnotized. Step 1. Go into trance yourself. Step 2. In your trance, think of the animal, dog, cat, lion, that you are going to hypnotize. Think about the essence of that animal. Try to become that animal. Molly shut the book and put it under her covers. She stared at the light that played on the yellow wall, and she started to transport herself into a trance, up a sort of misty slope away from the world and into her mind. She quickly felt distant and floaty, and soon her surroundings looked like a blur, except for the light on the wall. Then Molly shut her eyes, and following the book's instructions, she thought of her animal, Petula, Miss Adderson's pet dog. She would be Molly's subject. Think about the essence of that animal. Try to become that animal. Dr. Logan's words drifted through Molly's mind. The essence of Petula. Molly concentrated on the velvety furred pug. She was a bad-tempered dog, spoiled and cosseted, overfed and lazy. How had she become so bad-tempered? She was the only dog Molly had ever met that was always bad-tempered. Molly saw her in her mind, her solid, black-haired frame, her crooked front legs that were bent because of her fat, overweight body, her turned-up tail, her squashed face, the white mark on her forehead, her snarl, her bad breath, her bulging eyes. In her trance, Molly imagined turning into Petula's dull, watery eyes. By the way, that's this done. Closer and closer she got until Petula's eyes were the size of black billiard balls, then black basketballs, then huge black medicine balls. And then, as Petula's eyes seemed to blow up to the size of 2 black hot air balloons, Molly's mind slipped under them into Petula's doggy mind. She found herself feeling... she put herself in pet space. She found herself feeling doggy. She felt her 4 sturdy legs, her ears, her highly sensitive nose. She smelled the chocolate on the floor beside her. She smelled the musty velvet cushion underneath her. This was amazing. She was actually smelling Petula's hairy cushion. Then she felt her tummy, swollen and overstuffed. She felt sick from all the chocolate cookies that Miss Adderstone fed her. Who the fuck feeds their dog chocolate cookies? Regularly, also. Ow, it really hurt. Molly knew just how Petula felt, and even found herself making a whining, growling noise in sympathy. Grrr. Molly heard Miss Adderstone's cuckoo clock strike 8 in the distance, and she opened her eyes. So that was why Petula was such a grumpy, unfriendly dog. She had a tummy ache from eating too many cookies. Molly felt as though a door had suddenly been opened in her head. She was stunned that she'd so easily understood Petula, and she wondered what other skills lay inside her, skills that Dr. Logan's lessons would enable her to use. If Molly learned every lesson in the book as quickly as this, she'd soon be an expert. Someone who wants to kill the dog. For a moment, Molly faltered. Actually, she hadn't done anything yet. Maybe she'd made up Petula's feelings. Eagerly, Molly opened the book again. She'd soon see if hypnotizing Petula was really possible. All she had to do was follow step 3. Hiccupy. When everyone had left for school, Molly heard Miss Adderstone's clipped steps as she grudgingly made her way up to the infirmary. Miss Adderstone was relieved to find that Molly was asleep. Holding her nose, she crossed the room and left a note on Molly's table. This is in a fucking cursive font. Since you are most likely infectious, you will stay out of the company of others until you are better. When you can keep foods down, go down to the kitchen passage and call Edna. On no account are you to go into the kitchen and breathe over the food. Here is a thermometer. When you are better and your temperature has reached to a normal 98.6 degrees, you must return to your bedroom and assume your normal schedule. I will expect you then to make up for the cleaning duties that you have missed. Miss Adderstone. Not long afterward, Molly heard Miss Adderstone's feet crunching across the gravel outside. As the iron gates swung creakily open, Molly looked out the window in time to see Miss Adderstone tottering toward her minibus. She was going somewhere, but without Petula. Now was Molly's chance to experiment on a real subject. She speedily read Step 3 in the Hypnotizing Animals chapter. Finding the essence of your animal may take you weeks, but do not give up. Find the voice that fits your animal. Well, Molly had already done that. She'd growled exactly like Petula. Step 4. Face your animal, slowly approaching it if necessary. Think of the animal's voice, and now perform it slowly and calmly. Repeat the animal's voice in a lulling way until the animal becomes rocked into a trance. A pendulum may be used. All students of hypnotism should acquire a pendulum. Study Chapter 4. Once the animal is in a trance, you will know it from the fusion feeling. Molly shut the book and went into the attic landing. She looked over the banister, and you could just see Petula snorting noisily on her velvet cushion. Molly quietly slipped down the stairs until she was 10 feet away from Petula. Half closing her eyes, she concentrated on Petula in her mind until the growl came out of her mouth again. Molly tailored the growl so that it was slower and more rhythmical. Grr, 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 she went. For a moment, she felt silly, but then, seeing Petula's ears prick up and her eyes open, Molly concentrated seriously. The little dog saw Molly and heard her making a familiar noise. Petula listened and cocked her head to one side. Normally she would have growled, since a child approaching usually meant there was a risk of her being picked up, and how Petula hated being picked up. It always made her tummy hurt. The stupid boss was always picking her up, and how painful it was. But this child was sympathetic. The noises this child was making were comforting. Petula saw that the child was getting closer, but she didn't mind. In fact, Petula wanted her close, so that she could look into her lovely green eyes. She liked the way the child's voice was making her feel relaxed. Soon Molly was only a foot away from Petula. Petula's black eyes stared straight at her. Grrr, grrr. Molly growled her Essence of Petula growl, hoping the hypnotism would work soon. And all of a sudden, Petula's eyes glazed over as if a pair of curtains had been shut behind them. It was a peculiar thing to watch, and while she watched, Molly felt a warm, fuzzy feeling rising from her toes all the way up her body to the roots of the hair on her head. It was the fusion feeling that Dr. Logan had described. Molly stopped making her noises. Petula sat like a stuffed dog staring into space. Molly had done it. She could hardly believe it. This was amazing. She'd actually hypnotized an animal. Now, thought Molly, she could suggest things to Petula. But then she realized with annoyance that this would be difficult since she didn't speak dog. How she'd love to tell Petula to drool in Miss Adderstone's sherry glass, or to bite her ankles, or roll in a cow pat and then sleep on Miss Adderstone's bed. Suddenly, Molly thought of the best thing she could do for Petula. She would put her off the chocolate cookies that Miss Adderstone constantly fed her. Petula ate the cookies out of habit and greed, not realizing they were making her feel ill and bad-tempered. Molly reached in her pocket for her half-used ketchup packet. And the powers of Justin be amazing. It surely do. Petula looked up at the girl in front of her, who was the nicest, most sympathetic person she'd ever met. The girl was holding one of her chocolate cookies and squirting something disgusting all over it. Something red. Petula knew it must be revolting because the girl was making horrid faces at the red stuff. The cookie seemed very unappetizing now, and the girl thought so too. She was making retching noises, and Petula trusted the girl. In her doggy mind, she knew that she must remember what this nice girl was showing her. Chocolate cookies were bad, bad, bad. Then the girl stroked Petula's head, and Petula liked her even more. The girl started to make soft growling noises again, and as she moved away, she uttered a sharp bark. This snapped Petula out of her trance. Petula shook her floppy ears with a puzzled expression on her face. She didn't remember what had happened in the last 10 minutes, but she felt different. For some reason, a new feeling had come over her, that she didn't like chocolate cookies anymore, but she very much liked the person sitting on the stairs. Molly waved at Petula. "Good girl," she said. Petula still had a tummy ache, but she liked this girl so much that she made her way up the stairs for a stroke. She wagged her tail, which was a lovely sensation because she hadn't wagged it for weeks. Molly patted Petula and felt very satisfied. Then she went to the bedroom and flushed the ketchup-covered chocolate cookie away. Although Molly's stomach rumbled a lot that morning from hunger, she didn't care. She was devouring the hypnotism book. At lunchtime, smells of baked eel, Miss Adderstone and Miss Edna's lunch, wafted upstairs. Molly nipped down to Petunia's landing and was very pleased to see that she hadn't touched any of her cookies. Molly had chocolate cookies for lunch. At 4 o'clock, Molly heard everyone arriving back from school, and Miss Adderstone filling Petunia's cookie bowl. When everyone was at tea, Molly took 3 of the cookies. Half an hour later, she heard a car outside. Molly peered from her window to see the American visitors arrive, a thin, bearded man and a woman in a pink headscarf. Miss Adderstone, in her turquoise polyester suit and on her best behavior, was squawking, "Welcome! Come in!" For a moment, Molly felt a pang of longing. If only it might be her who was chosen and taken away, whisked away like Satin Knight and Moses Wicker had been. But she knew that adoption was a rare thing, and that if anyone was chosen today, it definitely wouldn't be her. And anyway, when she thought of her book, life at the orphanage didn't seem quite so bad. Twice more that day, the cookie bowl was filled. Each time, Molly sneaked downstairs to help herself, and in this way, she was able to keep her hunger at bay. Now she's going to be the one feeling sick. Molly read late into the night, concentrating hard on Dr. Logan's lessons. When she finally turned the light off, she had the warm, comfortable feeling that time was on her side. She could be ill for at least another day before Miss Adderstone came to investigate. She could survive on Petula's cookies and absorb Dr. Logan's wisdom at her leisure. In a few days, she would have the secrets of the book well and truly stowed away in her head. It was annoying that 2 of the chapters had been torn out, but she could learn everything from the other 7. She couldn't wait to tell Rocky about her find. Their argument now seemed petty beside the powerful secrets of the hypnotism book. Molly lay in bed, wondering where she could find a pendulum. The image of the bad-tempered professor in the library crossed her mind. Molly's felt slightly guilty. This must be the best textbook about hypnotism in existence, written by one of the world's most famous hypnotists. The poor professor's research would be incomplete without Dr. Logan's thoughts upon the subject, and he had come thousands of miles for it. No wonder he was so angry. Well, Molly thought, she'd put the book back after she'd finished with it. Then he could pore over it for years, and with her conscience at peace, she drifted off to sleep. She didn't give the professor another thought, and that was her big mistake. Oh, a stretch. Okay. Big stretchy. The next morning, Molly was woken up from a deep sleep by Petula trying to jump on her bed. When Molly looked down, Petula dropped a stone on the floor as a present. She seemed much chirpier. Molly pulled her up onto the bed and scrunched her ears. "I'm the one who should be thanking you, Petula. You've really helped me, you know." Petula tapped Molly's chest with her paw as if to say, "No, you're the one who helped me." So they were friends. Molly swung her legs out of the bed and went to the window. She could just see the church clock over the slatted village roofs. It was 9 o'clock. The other children were already out on their Saturday morning walk. Look, it's fine. Shut up. It's fine. Miss Adderstone liked to drive the children in the minibus to the far side of a hill called St. Bartholomew's Hump. 10 miles away. Dropping them there, she expected them to walk up the hump and back over the hilly countryside to the orphanage. This gave Miss Adderstone 3.5 hours to herself, which she always spent in town, having her corns clipped and her bunions seen to, then perhaps somewhere for a couple glasses of sherry. Which meant that Molly had roughly 3 hours until everyone returned. Wasting no time, she put on her dressing gown and left the room. It was lovely to be able to slide down the banister with no one around. Petula bounded after her, rushing into Miss Adderstone's apartment through her dog flap, and out again with her leash in her mouth. She followed Molly down to the ground floor. Molly walked through the hall, then skidded across the polished wood floor of the assembly room. Down to the kitchens they went. Down the slope past the cutlery drawers and the plate racks, Edna could be heard clanking metal saucepans as she started to prepare lunch. Molly walked stealthily on, in her hand turning over the lessons she had learned from Chapter 3, Hypnotizing Others, and Chapter 4, Pendulum Hypnosis. In the attic room, Molly had already made an imaginary journey into Edna's head. There she'd found a disgruntled person, full of resentment, bored by life, and tired of working. Molly thought she knew how to hypnotize Edna. It shouldn't be too difficult. After all, grunting Edna was very like an animal, and if it all went wrong, Edna would just think she was strange. Molly walked into the old-fashioned kitchen, with its cracked white tile walls, its broken sinks, its two gas oven, I can't fucking read, and its flagstone floor. Petula followed. Edna was taking chicken heads out of a bag and putting them into a huge saucepan of boiling water. Hello, Edna, Molly said. That smells nice. Edna jumped and then shot Molly a dirty look. You're bleeding creepy, you are, creeping around like that, she said. Molly tried again. What's that you're making? Bloody soup, of course, grunted Edna, pulling a feather off of one of the chicken heads. For once, Edna's language was correct. The soup really was bloody, with all the chicken heads in it. Yum, said Molly, her stomach turning. A Navy recipe? Expect you've come for something to blasted eat. Better not be bleeding infectious. You look bleeding uncomfortable, said Molly suddenly. Course I look bleeding uncomfortable, Edna retorted. I am bleeding uncomfortable. This kitchen too hot. She pulled at her white apron and flapped her arms, reminding Molly of a big fat turkey. Why don't you sit down, suggested Molly. I'll stir the blasted soup, and you can make yourself comfortable. Come on, Edna. You bleedin' deserve it. Edna looked suspiciously at Molly, but something in Molly's words made her feel at ease. If you sit down, you'll feel more comfortable, Molly coaxed. And lazy as Edna was, she agreed. Yeah, I can't see why not. After all, you've been in blasted bed for a day and a half while I've been slaving around down here. She sat down in the kitchen chair, her legs splayed out like a doll's. I bet that feels more comfortable, Molly said, taking the spoon from Edna. You must be bleeding exhausted. Edna nodded. I am. Phew. She leaned back and exhaled noisily. You're doing the right thing, said Molly, looking at Edna calmly. Taking breaths like that, deep breaths, will make you feel much more relaxed. I suppose you're right, agreed Edna, puffing out a grumbly breath and closing her eyes. Molly's voice slowed. If you take a few breaths, you'll see how relaxed you feel and how much you needed to sit down. Yes, said Edna, I did bloomin' well need to sit down. But then she opened her eyes. Hang on a minute, you're bleeding infectious. I shouldn't be letting you near that food. This was annoying. Maybe hypnotizing Edna wasn't going to be such a breeze. Maybe she should have brought some sort of pendulum with her to focus Edna's mind. It's all right. The boiling of the bloody soup will kill any germs, said Molly. In an inspired move, she began to stir the soup slowly and rhythmically. can't imagine hypnotizing someone by stirring a spoon. The wooden spoon circled to the rhythm of her words. Edna watched the spoon. "Don't you think," said Molly, "the boiling soup will kill the germs? Nothing to worry about." Edna seemed about to say something, but her eyes were overcome by the movement of the stirring spoon. I suppose you're bleeding right," she sighed and sat back again. "I expect your shoulders and back are feeling much more comfortable," said Molly. Agreed Edna. "They are." Then she said, "Molly, you got very big eyes, you know." "Thank you," said Molly, turning her green eyes on Edna's. "Your eyes probably feel very heavy. Now you see how much you needed to relax." Edna's eyes started to flutter as she looked at Molly's eyes and watched Molly stir. "And this room is so warm and comfortable if you just sit there and I'll stir the soup round and round and round and round." Molly stirred, trying not to look at the chicken heads bobbing around in the pot. "I got real brown eyes, I know." "Round and round I'll stir, and Edna, you should just relax. To relax even more, perhaps you should shut your eyes." Edna did not shut her eyes, but she did look very distant and dreamy. Inside, Molly was so excited that she wanted to shout, "Yes, I've nearly done it." But instead, she said calmly, "I will count backward from 20, and you will feel more and more relaxed as I count backward." Molly stirred and concentrated on her most soothing voice. 20, 19, Edna's frown disappeared. 18, 17, Edna's eyelids hovered. 16, 15, 14, 13. At 13, Edna's eyelids suddenly clamped shut, and all at once the fuzzy, tingly feeling started to creep up Molly's body. "The fusion feeling!" Molly gasped. Then, noticing that this made Edna's eyes flutter again, she counted more. 11, 10, 9. Now, Edna, you are so deeply relaxed that you are in a trance. 8, so relaxed. 7, deeply relaxed. Molly stopped stirring the soup. Up. Just 'cause I just know. This was your favorite part? Good shit. Molly stopped stirring the soup and walked over to Edna. 6, she said, only a foot from her. 5. And as I count down now, you, Edna, will be more and more in a trance until, when I get to 0, you will be completely willing to do as I say. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Good. Up, said Molly as she looked at Edna, sitting quietly in the chair. She had done it. The low, steady voice that had given her the name Drono was obviously the perfect voice for hypnotism. It's funny because I was told before that I'd have a good radio voice or like podcast voice, so. Perhaps her eyes had something to do with it too. They felt as if they were glowing. For a moment, Molly was at a loss for words. She'd been concentrating so hard on how to hypnotize Edna that she hadn't thought about what to tell her to do. So she said the first thing that came to her mind. "From now on, Edna, you will be really, really, really nice to me, Molly Moon. You will defend me if anyone tells me off or punishes or bullies me." That was definitely a good start. "And when I come to the kitchen, you will let me make tomato ketchup sandwiches. You will buy me delicious things to eat from town because you like me so much, and you will stop making cheese and nut sauce fish. In fact, you refuse to make fish anymore unless it is fresh that day. And, Molly hesitated, then added recklessly, you will become very interested in Italian cooking. You will get Italian cookbooks and try your hardest to become the best Italian chef in the world. And you will cook lovely Italian food from now on for everyone, except for Miss Adderstone, whom you will give normal food, but you will make it much, much spicier. I have the best voice. Oh, thank you. Also, without knowing it, you will make Hazel Hackerly's food very spicy too, and Gordon Boyle's and Roger Fibbins. Is that clear? Edna nodded robotically. It was a wonderful sight.
Let's see if we can maybe get TikTok again. Let's see if the live is able. It looks like maybe.
Molly wanted to laugh, but then her stomach gave a loud rumble and she said firmly, and now, Edna, you will drive me to town and buy me a proper breakfast, and you will remain under my command. Edna nodded and stood up, and with her eyes still closed, walked straight into the door. But obviously, Edna, said Molly quickly, you have to open your eyes to walk and to drive. Edna opened her eyes and nodded. Her expression was distant and glazed, just as Petula's had been. Okay, Edna, let's go. So Edna, dressed in a white apron and a chef's hat and white clogs, walked out of the building like a zombie. I guess they're just fucking leaving the chicken head soup boiling. Did this book hypnotize me to like pasta? No, that was core written into me. Maybe I manifested the book. Molly picked up a coat to cover her pajamas, and outside, Petula picked up a piece of gravel to suck. On the way down to Briarsville, Edna drove with a very peculiar expression on her face, as if someone had just dropped an ice cube down her dress. Edna was not altogether there, it seemed. I definitely would not let someone drive in a trance. Mindless tasks, I know. She drove down the main road in zigzaggy jerks, nearly hitting an oncoming truck. That would be why. Then she shot 2 red lights and drove through a flower bed in a pedestrian-only park. Finally, she stopped the car on the pavement outside a cafe, and staring blankly ahead of her, she led Molly and Petula inside. From the door, Molly worriedly checked the street, very relieved to see that no policeman had spotted them. Hello. You feeling jealous of Edna? Oh my god. Inside the cafe, 2 construction workers looked up from their bacon sandwiches and studied Edna. In her white outfit, she looked odd anyway. On top of this, she was moving like a wind-up doll. Quickly, Molly encouraged Edna to sit down. Can I help? Asked a chirpy waiter who had a carnation in his buttonhole. I thought that said his butthole. Buttonhole. Yes, please, said Molly, since Edna was staring straight at the salt shaker with a surprised look on her face and was beginning to drool. I'll have 4 tomato ketchup sandwiches, not too much butter, and half a glass of orange squash concentrate with no water added. Molly's mouth watered. It was lovely to be able to order her favorite things. The waiter looked bemused. Orange squash concentrate was a sweet syrup used to make an orange drink with. People didn't normally drink it straight up. Shall I bring some water for you to mix it with? He asked. No thanks, said Molly, but a bowl of water for our dog would be great. Petula sat at her feet loyally, cocking her head to one side as Edna blew a raspberry. And for the lady? Asked the waiter. I love bleeding Italy, said Edna, sucking a fork. It's nice to be out of the hospital for the day, isn't it? Molly said to Edna kindly. The waiter smiled sympathetically. 20 minutes later, after the most embarrassing breakfast of Molly's life, they were driving back to the orphanage. Past Shoot It, the camera shop, past a bicycle shop called Spokes, past the antique shop with its curly painted name, Moldy Old Gold, Molly thought of things she'd always wanted and felt on top of the world. Miss Adderstone probably had mountains of orphanage money stacked up in her bank account. Probably not. GTA Hypnosis Edition, oh my god. All Molly had to do was hypnotize Adderstone into taking her shopping. Molly looked across at Edna, who was smiling with her mouth wide open. She was completely under Molly's spell. Would everyone be as easy to hypnotize as Edna? So far, Molly seemed to be a natural. Edna, said Molly, when we get back, you will walk down to the kitchen, and as soon as you pass the door, you will wake up. You will forget about our trip to town. You will not remember that I hypnotized you. You will tell Miss Adderstone that I came downstairs for an aspirin and that you think I'm still very ill. Do you understand? Edna nodded, her mouth hanging open like a puppet's. Then, slamming her foot down hard on the accelerator and her hand on the horn, she urged the car up the hill. Professor Knockman was woken from a frenzied sleep full of pendulums and swirling motifs by a car beeping loudly in the street outside his room in the Briarsville Hotel. He rubbed his eyes and ran his tongue along his plaque-covered teeth. Ew. Gross. Poor bimboed Edna. It's noisier than Chicago here, he grumbled to himself as he untangled the scorpion medallion from the mesh of his string vest and reached for a glass of water. After his frustrating experience at the library, the professor had extended his stay in Briarsville. He decided that if he badgered that pathetic librarian often enough, she'd find the hypnotism book. Or, he hoped, he might see someone reading it. Briarsville was a small enough town. Since Thursday, he'd been prowling the streets, stalking people carrying books. Mothers with small children had crossed the road to avoid him, and one group of teenagers had called him a weirdo, but he didn't care. He was determined to get a hold of Dr. Logan's book. He had particular reasons of his own for needing the secrets contained in it, and they had nothing to do with museum research. Professor Knockman knew a great deal about the life of the famous hypnotist. He had read how Logan had grown up in Briarsville and traveled to America, where he had become rich and famous with its hypnotism show. Knockman had studied yellowing old press cuttings describing the amazing feats of hypnotism performed by the doctor in the show that had made him one of the greatest celebrities of all time. He had visited Hypnos Hall, the palatial mansion that Logan had built with the money made from his career as a showman. Ooh. Maybe if I ever get a hypno house, it'll be called Hypnos Hall. Having the same dreams as everyone in the chat. But he had become especially fascinated when he learned about a book that Dr. Logan had written, which, it seemed, contained everything he knew about hypnotism. Very few copies of this book had been printed, and it was extremely rare. But Professor Knockman had discovered one of the only surviving copies of it was owned by the library at Briarsville. From that moment, he'd been absolutely determined to acquire that book for himself. He'd almost gotten two until that stupid librarian had lost it. Thinking of that librarian now made Knockman quake with rage. He imagined throttling her skinny neck, and blood rushed to his head. Puce in the face. P-U-C-E. Okay. He reached for the phone. "Room service," he said angrily. "Bring me a pot of coffee." He was desperate for that book. He never wanted anything as much. Nothing in his dishonest life had been quite as attractive, and he had big plans that depended on his finding it. Nobody was going to stop him having it, and he wouldn't return to America until he had that book safely in his fat, oily hands. I just dropped you. I know. Aphrodite's dream house. Edna and Molly arrived back at the orphanage in a swirl of flying gravel. The place was empty since Miss Adderstone was still out, and the other children had not yet returned from their walk. Lutula went to explore the garden, and Molly returned to the attic room, feeling very pleased with herself. I like how they didn't get, actual dog food for the dog. It autocorrects to Puck in your phone. Puck is a better choice. She sat down on the bed to think about the extraordinary thing she had just done. Hypnotizing Edna seemed almost as though it had been a dream. Opera music from the kitchen radio drifted faintly up the stairs as Molly marveled at her new power. Her eyes felt tired. Something odd had definitely happened to them when she'd hypnotized Edna. They felt as if they'd been glowing. Now they felt dull and heavy. Molly flicked through the hypnotism book to see if there was anything about glowing or tired eyes. In the part on how to hypnotize a crowd chapter, there was a part that read, "It's all in the eyes." To hypnotize a large crowd, you must learn how to hypnotize using only the eyes. This is very tiring for the eyes. The book had diagrams of an eye looking left, an eye looking right, an eye looking at objects close and far. Then Molly came to something called the looking glass exercise. Stand in front of a looking glass and stare straight into your own eyes. Try not to blink. Soon your face will change shape. Do not be alarmed. Your eyes will feel as if they are glowing. This glowing feeling is the feeling that you must have to hypnotize people with your eyes only. And this is the trick you need to hypnotize a crowd. Eye fixation. That's so crazy. Who would be into something like that? So Molly had hypnotized Edna using just her eyes. She was sure she'd used the spoon, like a pendulum, and her voice too. She went to the mirror and stared at herself. There was her pink, blotchy face and her potato nose. She stared at her closely set eyes. Her eyes glared back, green and intense. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, she stared. Her eyes quivered and then seemed to get bigger and bigger and bigger. The music downstairs sounded very distant. Molly concentrated on her eyes and tried not to blink, trying to make her eyes feel as if they were glowing again. Then suddenly something peculiar happened. Molly lost her own face entirely, and a different face began to grow where Molly's real face had been. Molly's hair turned orange and spiky. A big safety pin grew out of the side of her nose, and her eyelids were covered with blue and white makeup. She was staring at herself as a punk. Molly's legs felt all tingly, and her eyes felt as though they were throbbing, glowing and throbbing, switching on and off like the beam of a lighthouse. And this, the book said, was the eye trick for hypnotizing crowds. Molly blinked hard. She was relieved to see her normal face in the mirror. That had been very strange. Had the looking glass exercise made her hypnotize herself? Perhaps the book would explain what had happened. Molly scanned the section called the looking glass exercise, and there was a paragraph called hypnotizing yourself. Imagine forms of yourself that you would like to be, suggested the book. For instance, if you would like to be kinder or bolder, imagine yourself as being kinder or bolder, and in the looking glass you will see an alternative you. Molly sat back feeling puzzled. She hadn't imagined herself as a punk, yet that was the face that had appeared in the mirror. It was as if her unconscious mind had wanted her to be like a punk and had, through hypnosis, shown her a different identity. Who were punks? She had always thought of them as rebellious people. Molly certainly wanted to rebel. Yes, it seemed that her unconscious mind was one step ahead of her, showing her how deep down she wanted to be. Sliding down the hypnotism book safely under her mattress, she sat down to wonder what other Mollys could be conjured up. Then, still wondering, she took a pencil and began to bore a hole through a bar of soap from the basin. She unraveled a piece of cord from the bed cover's fringe, snapped it off, and threaded it through the soap. She made a knot at the bottom. Now she had a homemade pendulum. It wasn't a very good one, but it would have to do. And though she was tired, there was time to try it out on Edna before everyone else came back. On the way downstairs, she passed Petula, who trotted happily after her. As she came to the checkered stone floor of the hall, she heard, to her surprise, Hazel Hackerly's whiny singing voice. Hazel must have somehow evaded the Saturday morning walk. Molly peeped through the TV room doorway. She saw Hazel dressed in a cat outfit, wearing a white leotard, white tights, white tap shoes, and white fluffy ears on a band. It was her talent competition outfit. In her hand she swung a white tail, and while she danced, she sang, "I'm sorry I chased those pigeons. I'm sorry I killed that rat. I'm sorry I like to steal the milk. It's just I am a cat. Meow, meow." Molly watched Hazel tap dancing around the room, opening her eyes very wide, fluttering her eyelids, and looking really stupid. Molly wished she had a camera. Then she had another idea. When Hazel was curtsying, Molly took a deep breath and went in. Oh, not you, Drono. And you're with Smelly Petula? Not better, are you? Moaned Hazel. Petula growled at her. Yes, a bit better, thank you, said Molly, taking the soap pendulum out of her pocket. She sat down in front of Hazel and began to swing the soap pendulum as if she were just playing with it. What's that? Said Hazel. Soap you have to carry around because your hands sweat so much? Molly held the pendulum in front of her face and swung it rhythmically, side to side. What are you doing? Just relaxing, said Molly. No, you're not. You're trying to hypnotize me, snapped Hazel. Typical of a weirdo like you to think that hypnotism is something real. Molly stopped swinging the soap. No, I'm not, she said quickly. You're so weird, sneered Hazel, and Molly realized that she had approached Hazel too clumsily. Her previous successes had made her overconfident. Hazel was now too alert for Molly to hypnotize. I wasn't trying to hypnotize you. This isn't a pendulum. It's a soap on a string, so that I won't lose it in the bath. I hope you're not planning to have a bath, said Hazel nastily, rewinding her cassette, because Adderson would not be pleased to hear you'd ignored her punishment. If you're covered in sick, you'll just have to stay that way. No bath for 3 weeks, wasn't it? Confusion induction. Yep, I'm preparing myself. She got up to go. There was no point in staying just to be insulted. Hazel looked at Molly in disgust. Prize weirdo, she said. Then, as Molly was leaving the room, Hazel said slyly, By the way, have you heard? Heard what? Rocky's found a family. The words walloped Molly. It was as if a cascade of icy water had drenched her from head to foot. She found it hard to speak. When? Hazel smiled spitefully. That American couple that came yesterday. Amazingly, they liked him. Weird couple. Anyway, he left last night. Didn't say goodbye to you, did he? That's because, well, he told me he's gone right off you. Said it was like eating too much of something. He said he's kind of overdosed on you. Said he'd drop you a line. You're joking, said Molly. No, not joking, though I suppose it is funny. Molly stared at Hazel's mean face. Liar, she said, leaving the room, but inside fierce emotions scorched her. Rocky leaving? The idea was horrific. Molly couldn't believe it. The thought of losing Rocky was devastating, like losing your arm or your leg or your whole family all at once, because he was all the family Molly had. Hazel must be lying. Rocky would never have left without saying goodbye to Molly. In fact, he wouldn't leave unless she was adopted with him. That had always been their pact. That if they went, they'd go together. Hazel's bullying had simply reached a new level. Yet, a dreadful suspicion filled Molly that Hazel wasn't lying. On the landing, the light coming from the boys' bedroom doorway lit the passage, familiar and friendly. Seeing this, Molly knew Rocky's possessions would wink at her as soon as she entered his room. She would feel a fool for falling for Hazel's story. But with every step she took, she became more numb. The ghastly truth hit her as undeniably as a thump in the face. Rocky's bed was stripped of its sheets, its threadbare blanket was folded into a neat rectangle, and its pillow was without a cover. His bedside table stood bare of comics. The wardrobe was open, and his clothes were gone. Molly could hardly breathe. An invisible terror seemed to have gripped her chest, so that she couldn't use her lungs. She fell against the door jamb, staring at the anonymous corner in the ownerless bed. How could you? She whispered. Molly slopped across the room and sat on Rocky's old mattress. It was a little while before she could breathe normally and think logically again. In her heart, she felt sure that Rocky wouldn't leave without saying goodbye unless he had a very good reason. They'd had an argument, but it wasn't that serious. And although Rocky had been extra secretive lately, Molly didn't believe that he was sick of her. That was part of Hazel's vicious imagination. But why hadn't he said goodbye? He had always been unreliable and a bit of a wanderer, but Molly didn't think that his faults could actually make him forget to say goodbye to her. They were like brother and sister. He couldn't have been that vague. It was all too strange. With Rocky gone, Molly had no one. No one except Petula. The younger kids were okay, but they were too young to be her friends. Living here without Rocky was inconceivable. She must find out where he was. In a daze, Molly dragged herself upstairs to her attic room. She turned the basin tap on to wash her face. She felt very muddled. She glanced at herself in the mirror. There were her closely set eyes burning with tears. She stared intently at her reflection, remembering what had happened when she practiced the looking glass exercise before. Perhaps if she imagined herself feeling good now, she could hypnotize herself into happiness. As she stared, her features disappeared. The meowing music for Hazel's tap dance floated upstairs, and Molly imagined that she didn't feel so bad. In a moment, her face changed. Her cheeks became rounder and rosier, her hair softer and blonder. Ribbons grew in it. She looked pretty, like a child star. It was incredible. Molly started to feel a tingling sensation, like the fusion feeling, creeping up her body again. Her depression peeled away from her like a crusty old cocoon, and optimism took its place. And just then the idea hit her. A huge, stunning, colossal idea. She had this eye trick under her belt, and the eye trick was the hypnotism trick used on crowds. There would be an audience, a crowd of people, at the children's talent competition tomorrow. Somebody had to win that competition with its huge cash prize. Why shouldn't that somebody be Molly? Yeah. Amazing. Molly blinked and was herself again, but now she was feeling hopeful. She refused to believe that Rocky hated her, even if he had gone. She made up her mind on the spot. She'd discover where he was, and she'd work out a way to leave Hardwick House and join him. It might be difficult, but Molly promised herself she'd use every ounce of her energy and talent to find Rocky, and she wouldn't give up until they were together again. By Saturday evening, Molly was up and about. Although she felt better than before, she missed Rocky. All through evening assembly, as other children whispered excitedly about his adoption, Molly felt sad. She missed him, his black, shiny hair with his tight curls, his smooth black skin, his soft dark eyes. She missed his patchy jeans, which every week had new holes in them, and his hands that were more often than not covered with doodles. But most of all, she missed his reassuring smile. Miss Adderstone's announcement shook Molly out of her misery. Tomorrow is the Briarsville Children's Talent Competition. I believe some of you will be entering. You will walk from school to the town gilding hall to arrive for the competition by 1 o'clock. The prize money is, as you know, a ridiculous £3,000, and if any of you win, you are expected to donate your winnings to the orphanage funds. Is that clear? Yes, Miss Adderstone. After supper, we will be having a dress rehearsal. Miss Adderstone looked at Hazel and smiled her false teeth smile. Then the smile left her face. Molly Moon, I see you are well again. You will sit at a solitary table at supper, as I cannot have other children catching what you had. Yes, Miss Adderstone. Molly followed the others through to the dining room. Nobody talked to her, but she didn't care. Inside, the different-sized tables were laid with napkins and candles, and Edna was standing triumphantly beside a large pot of steaming spaghetti with peas and green vegetables in it. It smelled wonderful. Spaghetti primavera, Edna declared dramatically. Just like my mama make. Oh my god. And holding up a loaf of oily bread with olives in it, she added proudly, and my very own homemade ciabatta bread. The bread had a red, white, and green Italian flag stuck into it. Behind Edna on the wall was a map of Italy. Have you gone mad, Edna? Asked Miss Adderstone coldly. No, retorted Edna. I happen to have a love of Italy deep down in my soul, and sometimes it comes out. It's never come out before. There's always a first time for everything, said Edna. Well, I hope you've made me my usual food. I don't want any of this Italian muck. Certainly, Miss Adderstone. Unimpressed, Miss Adderstone made her way to her table with her plate of liver and kidney pie, while the children lined up for their meal. Molly noticed that Edna gave Hazel, Gordon, and Roger special plates of spaghetti. Extra spicy spaghetti, she hoped. It seemed Edna had remembered all of Molly's instructions. Very obedient of her. Edna's vegetable spaghetti was fantastic. Molly looked at the small children's faces as they tasted it. Gemma, Gary, Ruby, and Jinx were gobbling it up as if it might be snatched away from them before they'd finished it. It was, without doubt, the best thing Edna had ever cooked, but not for Hazel, Roger, and Gordon. They all gasped and spluttered after a mouthful of their food. "Pass me the water," Hazel croaked. Gordon forgot about Hazel being the boss. He filled his glass first and glugged it back. "Gordon," Hazel snapped. He poured some water for Hazel, and then Roger snatched the jug. "That is horrible," said Hazel, gagging and pointing at her spaghetti. From 4 tables away, Edna's voice boomed. "What did you say?" Edna's food had improved, but Edna had not, and her temper was as fierce as ever. She came marching over, and the bullies shrank in their seats. "What did you bleedin' say about my food, Hazel, bleedin' ackerly?" "Well, it's too spicy," said Hazel in a wormy voice. She wasn't used to being told off. "Spicy? Are you blasted barmy? You're eating spaghetti bleedin' primavera. It's Italian, Azer Ackerly, from the land of olive groves and opera. If you can't taste the finesse and the warmth of the eels in my pasta, if you think the summer sun in my food is too hot, then you, I'm afraid, are a complete and utter blinkin' moron and bogswill to you." Hazel looked at her plate and her eyebrows went up and down. Edna seemed to have gone mad. "It's delicious, Edna," said Molly loudly. Hazel shot her a dagger look. Edna smiled appreciatively. "Thank you, Molly," she beamed. "Molly Moon," Miss Adderstone shouted. "However much you like Edna's food, you know it is against the orphanage rules to shout. You will come to my office later for a punishment." Then she drank down her glass of sherry in one gulp and let out a burp. Perfect, thought Molly, looking at Edna and wondering if she had remembered Molly's other instructions. Edna was staring at Miss Adderstone with a look of outrage. A blush of red was beginning to flush her cheeks, and her face was twisting into angry contortions. "Is there something wrong, Edna?" Miss Adderstone asked crisply. Edna's face grew redder and redder and redder, like the center of a molten volcano. Then she exploded. "Wrong? Wrong? Molly Moon just complimented my food, Agnes Adderstone." Miss Adderstone's mouth opened in astonishment, and a small piece of kidney fell out of it. Never had Edna answered her back or called her by her first name. "She complimented my spaghetti primavera. Maybe loudly, but I like her compliments loud, and what's more, I like her. I like her an awful lot. I like her more than I like Italian cooking, which is a lot more than anything else in the world. And you told her off." Edna pointed one of the Italian flags at Miss Adderstone and roared, "You are not bleeding well punishing Molly Moon later over my stinking dead body." "You are very obedient. This is true." Miss Adderstone put her knife and fork down and stood up. "Edna, I think maybe you need a little holiday." "A little holiday? You must be joking. My work's just starting. I've got a blasted mountain to climb. I've got a whole of Italian cooking to learn." Edna now put the Italian flag to her chest as if swearing an oath, and to everyone's amazement, she stepped onto a chair and then onto a table. "Because I am going to become the best Italian chef in the world." Everyone stared. Gordon Boyles couldn't resist looking up her skirt to try and see the legendary tattoo on her thigh. Miss Adderstone walked unsteadily toward the dining room door. "Edna," she said sternly, "I would like to talk to you later." "Aren't you going to finish your supper?" said Edna from her lofty heights. "No, I too found my dinner too spicy." As Miss Adderstone went, Edna said under her breath, "Old cow, should have tried my spaghetti." After supper, Molly went obediently to the door of Miss Adderstone's apartment and knocked. Miss Adderstone opened the door and promptly put a handkerchief over her mouth when she saw it was Molly. Miss Adderstone's parlor was a dark room, paneled with dark chocolate brown painted wood and furnished with prune-colored chairs. A patterned gray carpet covered the floor, and the whole place smelled of mothballs, sherry, and a hint of antiseptic mouthwash. There were 2 small tables with lacy cloths on them, but no photographs in frames, as Miss Adderstone had no family or friends. 3 lamps with fringes lit the room, illuminating the pictures on the walls. All of the pictures were of dark woods, dark rivers, and dark caves. As Molly was thinking how spooky it was, Petula bounded up to her, dropped a stone at her feet, and licked her knee. Molly gave her a pat. "Control yourself, Petula," said Miss Adderstone. And Miss Adderstone said, "Then sit." Both Molly and Petula sat down. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of Miss Adderstone sucking on her false teeth, and Molly was sure the sound of her own heart beating. Miss Adderstone was her biggest challenge so far, and there was a horrible chance that this might all go wrong, especially since she didn't have a wooden spoon or any sort of pendulum object to focus Miss Adderstone's mind. Let's fucking go! The cuckoo clock on the wall broke the silence with its rusty, hollow chime. "Cuckoo!" Molly jumped. Miss Adderstone sneered. For another 6 chimes, the clock cuckooed. Molly watched the dusty wooden bird with its broken beak shoot in and out of the cuckoo house on its spring, until it finally disappeared into the hole. Miss Adderstone turned to look out of the window and spoke. "As you know, Rocky has left. He was responsible for many house duties that will now need doing by someone else. I have decided to give them all to you, as you are the sort of child who will learn a lot from hard labor. That display of yours in the dining room that provoked Edna was very vulgar. I hold you entirely to blame." When Miss Adderstone turned around, Molly was looking down. "Have the courtesy to pay attention when I'm speaking to you." Molly gritted her teeth and looked up. She had summoned the special eye sensation, and now, as she stared into Miss Adderstone's joyless, dreary eyes, her new power, like a trained laser beam, shot out. Miss Adderstone felt oddly unstable. "Thank you. That's more like it," she managed to say as normally as she could. She twitched, wondering whether this odd feeling was her heart palpitating again. After a sip of sherry, she felt better. "As I was saying." Miss Adderstone's cold eyes found Molly's again, drawn to them like a moth is drawn toward light. She was powerless to stop herself looking, so she looked, and as she did, a peculiar thing happened. All Miss Adderstone's anger drained away from her, and all her thoughts too. She couldn't remember what she was going to say. All she knew was that Molly's green eyes were very, very relaxing, and she was experiencing a warm, yawny feeling inside. And then Miss Adderstone was, all of a sudden, gone. That was a cheap shot. I don't know what you're talking about. Molly's eyes throbbed, and the fusion feeling shot through her body. As Miss Adderstone's head tilted sideways and her tongue lolled out of her mouth, pushing her false teeth forward, Molly calmed down. It was obvious that she was now in complete control. "Agnes Adderstone, listen to me. You are now under my command." Molly's voice sounded like waves lapping on a shore. Miss Adderstone nodded. "From now on, I can do nothing wrong. Do you understand? You will like me now as much as Edna does, which is a 10-ton amount. Anything I ask for, you will give me." Miss Adderstone nodded again. "And the first thing I want is Rocky's telephone number." Miss Adderstone shook her head. In a monotonous, robotic voice, she said, "I have no record. I destroyed the number." Molly was shocked. Miss Adderstone was obviously not as hypnotized as she looked. She must only be half hypnotized. Molly pumped up her eye power. "Miss Adderstone, you must give me the number," she said forcefully. "I'm telling the truth," said robotic Adderstone. "I never keep records. I always destroy records of children once they've left. It's always good to see the back of them. I wish they'd all leave here and leave me alone." "Except for you, Molly," Miss Adderstone whined. "Don't you go, Molly." Molly ignored her. So, Adderstone always threw records of children away. How completely horrible. You must remember the town he's gone to, Molly ordered, or the family's name. I want you to remember. Miss Adderstone obediently looked into the depths of her cobwebby mind. The family name was Alabaster. The town was I can't remember. It was a long address in America, near New York City. You must remember! Molly nearly jolted Miss Adderstone awake. She pumped up her eye power again. You must remember the town. Miss Adderstone stood dumbly, her eyes rolling in her head. Come on, Molly demanded. Think! Polchester, Pilchester, Porchester, said Miss Adderstone. Something like that. Where are the records kept? Demanded Molly. Show me. You can't have thrown everything about Rocky away. I don't believe you. Miss Adderstone meekly opened a gray filing cabinet in the corner of the room. Here, she gestured. Here are all the files. Molly hungrily flipped through the drawer. Rocky's file was not there. Instead, Molly saw her own name on a folder. She pulled it out. Miss Adderstone stood like a sentry by the desk. Molly opened her folder. Inside was a passport and one sheet of paper. Is this all you have on me? No reports? Nothing else? That's it, said Miss Adderstone. Molly read the sheet in front of her and froze. Name, Molly Moon. Date of birth, ? Place of birth, ? Parents, ? How came to Hardwick House? Doorstep drop. And underneath Miss Adderstone's crabby hand was written, a plain child, unremarkable, an outsider, not likable. And that was it. Molly stared at the piece of paper. She felt like more of a nobody than she had ever felt in her life before. She opened her passport, which she'd never seen, although she remembered having her picture taken for it. Miss Adderstone always kept the children's passports up to date, so that if any foreigners came to adopt, they could fly home immediately with the child they'd chosen. A 6-year-old Molly Moon smiled excitedly out of the little book. Molly remembered how keen she'd been to have her picture taken, and how Miss Adderstone had scolded her for smiling when the camera flashed. Molly felt enormously protective of the little girl in the picture. Looking at the stiff spinster in front of her, she wondered how a person could be so utterly without kindness. Had Miss Adderstone been mean ever since she was born? Molly took the paper with her own sad record from her folder, along with her passport, and stuffed them into her pocket. Then she wiped her sweaty hands on her skirt and concentrated again. Right. Now, Miss Adderstone, I'm going to take you into a deeper trance, and you will obey everything I say. Miss Adderstone nodded like a wind-up toy, and Molly licked her lips. All Molly's life she had been the target of Miss Adderstone's beastliness. Now it was time for revenge. 20 minutes later, Molly left Miss Adderstone's apartment with Petulia trotting behind her. She felt more powerful than she'd ever felt before. The dress rehearsal for the talent show was at 8 o'clock in the hall. Molly sat on the 8th step of the stairs so that she could see well. When Miss Adderstone stepped onto the makeshift stage in front of the empty fireplace, Molly sighed a deep, satisfied sigh. For Miss Adderstone had dressed herself up. She was wearing a pink frilly nightie and rubber boots. On her head she wore a bra. Round her neck, on a string, hung her false teeth. Good evening, everybody, she said in a sing-songy voice, her mouth a rubbery cave without her teeth. Then she lifted up her nightie and showed everyone her knickers. Whoopsie-daisy! All the children went quiet and stared aghast at Miss Adderstone's white, wrinkly legs. The change in her was so dramatic and strange that it was as if a Martian had landed in the room. On with the show, Miss Adderstone announced flamboyantly. Clicking her false teeth in the air like Spanish castanets, she stamped her rubber boots and with a flamenco flourish stepped off the stage. A few stifled, nervous giggles came from here and there. Then Miss Adderstone screeched in her usual crabby way, Gordon Boyle, spit that gum out. Gordon Boyle shrank in his chair. He'd prefer being told off by the old Adderstone. This Adderstone was creepy. Sorry, Miss Adderstone, he said in a tiny voice, spitting out his gum and putting it in his pocket. Ew. Molly walked down the stairs and stepped onto the stage. Cynthia and Craig booed in unison. Ugh, get off, drone zone. Molly stared at her shoes, concentrating on the eye sensation very, very hard. She was going to try to hypnotize everyone using only her eyes. What's the matter? Forgotten the tune of your drone? That's enough of that, snapped Miss Adderstone, clacking her false teeth castanets and biting the air with them. Anyone who makes trouble will get the nip. Everyone went quiet. Then Molly slowly lifted her eyes to the audience. They beamed out into the small crowd like a searchlight. Each and every person out there was caught, stunned like a rabbit in headlights. Molly felt as if they were playing a computer game. Each time a person locked onto her eyes, she felt their defenses fall. She worked through the rows. Gemma, Gary, Ruby, and Jinx were the easiest, but even the older ones were a walkover. All the eyes that normally held scorn and dislike for Molly were now blank and expressionless. Gordon, Roger, then someone tapped Molly's shoulder. I think I'm first, came Hazel's mean whine. Molly turned and cast her look upon Hazel. Hazel's slit eyes challenged Molly's. Then her face twitched oddly. Hazel's eyes felt funny. She was looking at Molly, ugly, unpopular Molly, who she normally wouldn't look at for long. But for some reason, her eyes now felt magnetized. Hazel tried to look away, but she couldn't. And like a person clinging to a riverbank being pulled away by a strong current of water, Hazel, too weak to hold on any longer, let go. Molly looked around the room. She was very impressed that she hadn't needed to use her voice at all. Everyone sat wide-eyed and thunderstruck. In a minute, I will sit down. When I do, I will clap my hands. When you hear me clap, you will all snap out of your trances, and you won't remember that I hypnotized you at all. And from now on, whenever you remember nasty things you have said or done to Molly Moon, you will hit yourselves over the head with whatever you are carrying. Molly left the stage and sat down. She clapped sharply once. She hadn't hypnotized everyone to love her. She didn't need to do that now. She just wanted to be sure she could manage a crowd, and she could. As the room came to life around her, Molly reached into her pocket, pulled out the sheet of paper that she found in Adderstone's files, and ripped it up. So far in life, Molly had drawn a short straw. Now she was gonna get what was due to her. A life like the world of Molly's favorite commercials. It might be just around the corner. Molly shivered with anticipation as she thought of all the lovely things she'd always wanted, but never had. She'd line her pockets with the talent competition prize money, but that would be just for starters. She felt sure that with hypnotism under her belt, she would never be short of money again. And as for people, Molly decided there and then that from now on, no one would push her or pinch her or boss her or bully her or ignore her. She was going to be a somebody now, and the world better watch out, because a new shiny Molly Moon was about to burst through the ether and dazzle it. The next morning, the orphanage woke to the lovely smell of fresh croissants and bread. Ooh, that sounds so good. And the aroma of baking matched Molly's sunny mood. Edna's Italian theme was going over the top in the dining room. She'd brought her radio in, and opera was playing loudly. Laid out on the tables were books on Italy. Been to the library, Edna? Molly asked, helping herself to a croissant and a sweet bun from the plate. Yes, you see I'm a fan of Italy, Edna explained politely, as if Molly didn't know. Ooh, big windy. So if the string goes out, might be because it's big windy and probably is going to get stormy, so. Oh yeah, then some big water droplets I just saw. Alright. I love Italy, Italian cooking in particular. The Italians really bleeding know how to live. She poured Molly a hot chocolate. Let me do that, Edna, said Miss Adderstone with a toothless smile, tugging the chocolate jug from Edna's stubborn grip. Molly, my dear, let me seat you. She led Molly across to the window as if she were royalty. Children whispered as Miss Adderstone swept past, her false teeth necklace swinging with every step. This morning she had a huge pair of knickers on her head. She was wearing her polyester suit, except that it had been snipped all over and was full of cuts and slashes. It looked like the mad creation of some crazy fashion designer. I like your suit, said Molly. Oh, thank you, Molly. I did it myself last night with a pair of scissors. Behind them, someone screamed. Miss Adderstone turned her usual foul expression, for nothing had changed in the way she felt toward other children, and looked horrified. Hazel Hackerly had hit herself with her mug and tipped hot chocolate all over her head. What do you think you are doing, Hazel? Miss Adderstone said furiously. Excuse me, Molly. There was another yell as Roger chucked milk all over his hair. Miss Adderstone snapped her false teeth castanets and descended upon him like a bad-tempered lobster. That's it, Robber Fibbin. For that, you get a nip. And click-clacking her way toward the quaking Roger, she gave him